Hi, I'm Oscarito, and this is the movie Eden. A group of Europeans abandoned civilization to create their perfect paradise on island. Within months, their utopian dream became a nightmare of jealousy, manipulation, and mysterious deaths. In 1929, Germany faces economic collapse in the aftermath of World War I, with fascism spreading rapidly across the nation. Dr. Friedrich Ritter and his companion Dora Strauch make the radical decision to abandon civilization entirely. They leave Germany and journey to the uninhabited island of Floriana in the Galapagos archipelago, seeking to create their own utopian society far from the corruption of modern life. Ritter, an idealistic philosopher doctor, regularly sends letters to the outside world via passing ships, documenting their isolated existence. His goal is ambitious: to write a revolutionary new philosophy that will save mankind from itself. These letters, published in German newspapers, paint a romantic picture of their primitive paradise and inadvertently inspire others to follow their example. In 1932, inspired by Ritter's widely publicized quest for a better life, Margaret Whitmer, her husband Heinz, and her stepson Harry make their own desperate escape to Floriana. The family sells all their possessions in Germany and undertakes the arduous journey, hauling their belongings up the island's steep hills until they locate Ritter and Dora's settlement. When Heinz shows Ritter a newspaper featuring his famous letters, the doctor is less than pleased. He coldly reminds them that he came to the island specifically for solitude. However, he reluctantly agrees to give the family a tour of his domain, showing off his meticulously cultivated garden, the product of 12 months of backbreaking labor to clear the dense tropical brush. The Whitmers' arrival is motivated by desperation rather than philosophical idealism. Young Harry suffers from tuberculosis, but the family cannot afford proper medical treatment in Germany. They've heard that Dor has been successfully treating her multiple sclerosis using natural methods, though Ritter refuses to share his knowledge, claiming he's saving it for his upcoming manuscript. Ritter strategically settles the family in a cave system far from his own compound near the island's only other water source, a tiny, barely adequate stream. His wife Dora makes it clear she disapproves of the new arrivals, viewing them as an unwelcome intrusion on their carefully planned isolation. The delicate balance of island life is shattered when an elegant yacht arrives, carrying Baroness Eloise von Wagner-Bousquet and her entourage. She emerges from the ship like a movie star, declaring herself the embodiment of perfection, while her two lovers, Robert and Rudolph, carry her to shore. Her servant Manuel follows with an enormous wardrobe of luxury clothing, completely impractical for island life. The Baroness immediately announces grandiose plans to build an exclusive millionaire's resort on the island's prime beachfront property. Her arrival marks the beginning of a psychological war for control of Floriana. Unlike the philosophical Ritter or the desperate Whitmers, the Baroness represents pure narcissistic ambition and manipulation. From her first encounters with the other settlers, the Baroness reveals her manipulative nature. She expects Dore to kiss her hand in deference, and when Ritter appears naked from his dwelling, she flatters him as a tamer of nature while simultaneously working to undermine his authority. Her strategy is divide and conquer. She plays the settlers against each other while maintaining a facade of aristocratic charm. The Baroness quickly establishes herself as a master manipulator. When she learns that Heinz receives mail for Ritter, she deliberately opens the letters before passing them along, creating suspicion between the men. She then reveals to Heinz that Ritter intentionally directed her to use the family's precious water source, hoping to drive them away through conflict. Meanwhile, the island's harsh realities continue to challenge all the settlers. The Whitmers work tirelessly under the scorching sun, struggling with mosquitoes, wild dogs that raid their supplies, and Harry's persistent breathing problems. When Margaret announces her pregnancy, it adds another layer of stress to their precarious survival situation. The Baroness's true cruelty becomes evident during a dinner party at her elaborate camp. In a shocking display of her dangerous nature, she threatens Dor with a pistol, revealing the depths of her malice and willingness to use violence to maintain control. This incident marks a turning point where her manipulative mask slips away completely, exposing the monster beneath. The Baroness orchestrates her most cruel scheme when she targets Dora's beloved donkey, one of the few sources of joy in the harsh island life. Using her lovers Robert and Rudolph as accomplices, she plans an elaborate setup designed to destroy the trust between neighbors while causing maximum emotional pain. Under the cover of darkness, her men steal the cherished animal and lead it onto the Whitmer family's territory. When Heinz hears unfamiliar sounds in the night and fears for his family's safety, in a moment of panic and protective instinct, he shoots and kills the innocent creature. The aftermath is devastating. Dor loses her beloved companion while Heinz is consumed with guilt over the unnecessary killing. The Baroness watches the destruction of neighborly relationships with satisfaction, having successfully turned friends into enemies through her calculated cruelty. This incident represents the complete corruption of their island paradise. As drought grips the island and resources become increasingly scarce, the other settlers begin to recognize the Baroness as their common enemy. Rudolph, originally one of her lovers, grows disgusted with her manipulative behavior and begins secretly working against her. He reveals to the Whitmer family that the Baroness is a complete fraud. Her aristocratic background, accent, and mannerisms are all stolen from movies. In reality, she's a failed dancer from Paris who ran out of money and sees the island as her last chance for reinvention. The final confrontation begins when Ritter and Heinz decide they can no longer coexist with the Baroness's destructive presence. Armed with weapons, they march to her compound for a showdown that will determine the island's future. What begins as an attempt at negotiation quickly spirals into deadly violence. Robert, still loyal to the Baroness, immediately attacks Ritter and Heinz to defend his mistress. The younger man's strength gives him an initial advantage in the brutal fight. Rudolph, now fully committed to betraying the Baroness, intervenes by stabbing Robert's hand with a knife. Robert retaliates, attempting to stab Rudolph, but Heinz pulls him away. In the desperate struggle that follows, Heinz repeatedly stabs Robert until he dies. The Baroness emerges and attempts one final manipulation, claiming she was Robert's victim all along and offering to share ownership of the island. Her lies fall on deaf ears. Friedrich Ritter, pushed beyond his breaking point by months of psychological warfare, shoots the Baroness in the head, ending her reign of terror forever. Faced with two bodies and the reality of their actions, the surviving men dispose of the corpses by throwing them into the ocean. To protect themselves from legal consequences, they concoct a story that the Baroness and Robert simply departed the island voluntarily, perhaps sailing away to start fresh elsewhere. However, their wives are not fooled by this fabricated tale. When Margaret and Dor discover that all of the victims' belongings remain untouched in their residence, it becomes clear that something terrible has occurred. The women live with the weight of unspoken knowledge about what really happened. Rudolph, traumatized by the violence and eager to escape before facing consequences, quickly sells all of Robert's and the Baroness's possessions to Ritter. Using the money from these sales, he purchases passage off the island and attempts to flee back to civilization as quickly as possible. Dore becomes deeply disillusioned with Friedrich's descent into violence, seeing it as the complete destruction of their utopian ideals. Feeling betrayed by her partner's participation in the brutal killings, she makes a fateful decision during what will be their final meal together. She prepares chicken for Friedrich's dinner, but deliberately uses meat from diseased birds that Margaret had specifically warned her not to cook. Whether motivated by revenge, despair, or a desire to end their failed experiment, Dore watches as Friedrich consumes the contaminated food and dies in agony from food poisoning. With Friedrich's death, the last remnants of their philosophical paradise crumble completely. When a government investigation arrives following newspaper reports of the murders, the truth becomes even more complex. Ritter's final letter to the authorities blamed Heinz for the Baroness's murder, while Dore initially corroborated this story. However, Margaret reveals to the governor that Ritter was also murdered, explaining how Dore deliberately fed him diseased chicken despite having access to healthy birds. The governor arrests Dore instead of Heinz, recognizing her as the final killer in the chain of violence. The movie ends.